All right, so we are recording now, and I'll get started talking about Show Me What's Not in Show Me. So the first thing that I want to definitely make sure we're all on the same page on is just what exactly is Show Me. So Show Me is a part of Tableau Desktop. It is a way that Tableau can give us some hints on best visualizations to use based on fields that we select. So let's start with a quick demo of that so we're all on the same page. So if I know I'm interested in looking at my subcategory and my profit and my sales, can control-click all of those. We'll highlight them. You'll see Show Me is on the right-hand side, and I'm able to click in on the charts that are highlighted with color. So I see that tree map is one of the options available to me, so I'm going to click on that, and Tableau will build that visualization for me using Show Me. I can always hide the Show Me option. One thing that I want to make sure is really a starting point too is whenever we choose a chart with Show Me, we're able to make adjustments. So we can, for example, put this sum of sales also on text. So we're able to add any detail that we want to. Tableau's Show Me is not a hard rule, right? We're able to adjust and add any information that we want. So that's where I'd like to start today, just making sure we're on the same page of what we have available to us with Show Me. Now, why would we talk about kind of anything besides that if we have that ability in Tableau? I as a product consultant often get asked kind of, can Tableau create any and then insert name of a complex chart type? You know, we know there are a lot of different chart types when we're doing visual analytics. And I think another place to start this talk is to really think about why we use visual analytics. So we may have a lot of different chart types that we've seen. Tableau can build almost anything, but the next question I like to ask is kind of, even if it's possible technically, why do you want to do it? So this is a funny joke about in and out. So yes, you can change your order to something that you may have seen that seems very flashy, but the basis of any advanced visualization and any advanced chart is not just the technical piece, but it is also the application. So why are we doing this? And so that's going to be a key theme in the talk today. When I introduce a new chart type, I'm also going to introduce what type of analytical benefit it brings to our dashboard or our visualization. I'm going to go ahead and go back in present mode for this. So another place that I want to make sure that we start is that idea of, can Tableau create something? A place to ask that, this is a Tableau Public dashboard. And this is something that I make sure that everyone, when they're getting started in Tableau and also getting started building more complicated visualizations, they know exists and is available to them. So we'll share this link. It is the Tableau Viz Cookbook built by Tableau Zen Master. And you can see that there are a lot of different charts that are available to you. So I've just embedded this Tableau Public page here. So this is actually straight from the website. I love to show this because you can see the options and see kind of the description of the chart. Click in on any of them and see how it was built. But also you'll notice that we can search for a chart type by name, which is that first kind of slide of the in and out. Can you build this chart type? We have that ability as a filter here. But I like to highlight this, so search for a chart by type. This is where I like to focus when I'm doing more advanced visualizations, is actually what type of chart, what type of analysis am I doing? And from there, what chart makes sense? So that's kind of the flow that I would recommend when we're going beyond Show Me, is to always think about what is the type of analysis that I'm doing, and then what are charts and visualizations that highlight that type of analysis. things like data over time versus comparisons, distribution. There's a lot of different types of analysis, so different charts are better for different types of analysis. Today, the charts that we're going to go over in the format of this presentation is going to be starting with some more simple adjustments that are the first steps out of Show Me, going to more complex charts. And what I'll do is I'll walk through what the purpose of these are, what context they fit in, and we'll also build them together on the call. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and go into our first chart type, which is a small multiples. Small multiples are great when we have more than one dimension. So when we have, for example, this stock, and there's more than one, that if we were to overlay these and have 7 lines on top of each other, we wouldn't get a sense. It would be a crowded view, and we wouldn't get a sense of the kind of high-level trending patterns in each of those fields, each of those stocks. So an example of this, I love showing this map example because maps, I think, are a pretty common example of if we have something on a filter, we actually have to go into the filter. We're not able to overlay years on top of this map here, right? So we're not able to see across time with a map view. We're only able to select a drop-down and see the change, but there's a lag there. So if I wanted to make sure I see what might change in Idaho, I'd have to try and remember what that color is, and then when I switch, try and make that comparison in my head, but it's not there. This is a great example of a use case for a small multiple. So what that looks like is actually having that dimension allow us to build the chart multiple times so we see the chart and we can see how the West Coast has changed at one time without having to wait for that lag. This is another example of a small multiple. It's actually a bar chart. So we can build bar charts pretty easily with Show Me. This is taking that the next level, and we'll actually build this. This is a small multiple that we'll build together on this call. So you'll see we have a dimension subcategory where we're breaking that up, seeing total sales, but we're able to see that over time without adjusting a filter. So I can see all at once, right? No lag time. So what is it like to build that? We're going to start here by looking at our sales. So I'm going to drag out that sales to make sure I see what my sales are by my subcategory. And then I can sort that. And now is the time when I might normally be used to looking at this order date on filter, but instead we're actually going to build that small multiples chart. So I'm going to make sure that I have 4 of these bar charts. By doing that, I'm going to drag order date to the columns shelf. So then I actually have 4 columns for each of those years. We can add any additional information here, perhaps adding sales onto color to add an additional, but now we have this full view without having to use that filter, and we get a lot of context. We can also hop in to the actual visualization and choose which year we are sorting on. So I can choose 2015 or 2016 and change that in the visualization. The next chart that we are going to go over and build together is called a sparkline chart. The reason we are doing this one next is because it's quite similar to a small multiple, but it's a level up. So instead of having multiple bar charts, we actually have a list of line charts. And we can see that line chart for each of these subcategories so we really get a sense of how the trends change across subcategory. Let's start to build that together. So the first thing that we know is, again, we're going to be looking at sales. And I want to be looking at sales over time. So I'll drag my order date over to columns. And the automatic aggregation here, if you're familiar with Tableau, you'll know it's going to be looking at this in the year aggregation. But I really want to be looking at this in a trending over time, high level. So I'm going to change this to make sure I'm looking at this at the month level. So now I have one line chart. The next step here in creating a spark line is building out multiple line charts. So I'll drag out the dimension that I want to be comparing at a high level how things are trending. And that's going to be, again, that subcategory. So we're going to drag out to rows because we want multiple line charts on top of each other. And so here is one of the key parts of this spark line. So I like to add this in the advanced visualizations piece because we may be used to building timelines, but there's an extra added piece here that is a more advanced formatting in Tableau. That is being able to actually edit this axis. So right now we're looking at all of these on the same axis range. But if we're looking to compare how things have changed over time for each subcategory, we may not actually be able to see that if bookcases, for example, is a subcategory that has comparatively a lower range of sales. So if I right-click on any of these axes, I'm able to edit this axis. One of the options, the first option here actually, is to add an independent range for each row or column. And so for spark lines, that is appropriate. I want to be seeing a high level trending. So I'm going to change from uniform to independent. You may have already seen that there's a pretty significant change in the background here. I'm also going to clean this up, I'm going to hide this axis here. So I'm going to actually unclick this show header because right now this sales, indicating that we're looking at sales, is just repeating and taking up space, not adding to the actual analysis that we want to be doing. So by right-clicking on the axis and clicking show header, I'm able to hide that. The last piece for spark lines is an additional formatting. So we can go ahead and add sales to color, but as you saw in this example, we actually don't have any lines in the background here. So as you're building and tailoring the charts that Tableau automatically builds, you may have a need to really add some additional formatting. That formatting will come in this format pane here. So if I click on that format, I'm able to choose kind of lines and brought to the format pane on the left-hand side. And that's where you'll want to go in and change the 0 lines to none, so we get rid of that dotted line, and so on and so forth. So we'll want to make sure that we don't have kind of any of these drop lines, and we can even get rid of these axis ticks. I'll go in, just show an example here to make sure we are at none for all of those. So now instead of having a line distracting in the background, when we have a blank background, we're really focusing on what the point of the spark lines are. Okay, the next chart, we're going to keep on building to more and more complex, less like show me charts. So the next chart I'm going to introduce is actually a bump chart. So you'll see in this example here This is one of my favorite visualizations, actually, because it draws on color and a different type of chart. So this chart is showing color popularity for new cars in North America across time. And we're actually able to see pretty quickly that gray and white have swapped places. So gray used to be the top selling car color, and white switched over in around 2006, 2007. So you're kind of able to see comparison of rank over time, which can be really useful. We're going to take advantage in Tableau of a couple of things. So table calcs will be the main one, and we'll also edit and access. There's a lot of blog posts about bump charts if you're ever curious and want a step-by-step. Definitely check those out. But we'll walk through an example here and then build it together. So why would you want a bump chart? This is an example of looking at average percentage in polls over time for a couple of months during this Democratic election season. So you'll see that I have candidate names on color, and I'm just looking at them right now over time. What I'm not able to do very quickly compared to that first bump chart is show how the rank is changing. So I'm not able to do that in a fast way, which is really what I would want in this type of analysis. So the first step to creating a bump chart is to start here to create a line chart and drag your dimension onto color or detail. And then we're going to want to change from looking at actual percentage on this axis, the y-axis, to the rank of the percentage. And that will do with a table calculation. This table calculation you want to make sure is computing the rank actually table down. So we're getting the rank for the time instead of where this candidate is doing across time. We want to make sure it's actually where does this candidate stand at this point in time. So that's another important piece of bump charts. And we'll build one together, but these are the important steps that I'm going to walk through. So the fourth step here, one of the more important ones, is when you first do this rank table calculation and change the axis, the top is going to be actually the lowest ranking field. But we normally, in our background of looking at rank, we're used to seeing number 1 as the first thing. So we'll want to actually edit that axis and just reverse it. So number 1 is on top. Then you can add in some extra formatting here, like you saw in the car example and in this example of adding in some way without having to go to a color legend to know kind of what each of these ranks represent, or what each of these lines represent, rather. We can do that by making a dual axis here. We're going to create a bump chart here together after walking through why we would need a bump chart. So that was one example of starting without a bump chart and then building it. We're going to do that together. So really just step by step of how do you create a bump chart. Remember, bump charts are telling us how rank compares over time. So we know that we want to be looking at this order date over time. So I'm going to make sure to drag that over onto the columns. What I'll do here, instead of dragging and changing the aggregation, I'm actually going to right-click, drag, put this on columns. So I have this option for me to choose the aggregation that I'm interested in, which will be month over time. And then we know we're going to be wanting to look at profit. So I'm going to, instead of sales, we're going to be looking at actually profit over time. And this piece is where we'll add in the dimension that we want to be comparing the rank of. So for today, instead of subcategory, which we've been using, I'll use segment. So we want to know kind of what is our top segment in each of these weeks, and has it been the same segment across time? So I could add segment to color here, but you'll notice that it takes a little bit for me to really see, what is number one in this first week. More complicated as we go on. So my eye is having to switch around. That's the use of a bump chart. So instead of looking at this profit on the axis, I actually want to be looking at rank. So to do that, we'll right-click on our sum of profit pill, and we'll take advantage of our rank quick table calculation. So now I have this range on my axis, which is up to 50, which doesn't quite make sense because I want to know what the rank is of each of my segments at a point in time. So there should only be a range of 3 because I have 3 segments: consumer, corporate, and home office. So let's make sure that we are looking at our rank in the right way. So I'll actually right-click again and compute using segment, because I want to rank my segments. So pretty quickly we see that looks better. We just have a range of 3 options. The only problem here that we have not solved for is that 4 is on top. So it looks like from first glance that the corporate is our top ranking segment for January 2015. But what makes more sense is actually to edit this axis. So we'll right-click, edit, and go ahead and reverse this scale. So now, instead of seeing corporate as our number 1 selling, we'll see home office as our number 1 selling. Okay, so that was a step-by-step of looking at a bump chart. I'm going to go ahead and actually filter this to just 1 year. So let's say I just want to be looking at 2015. Now I can see for 2015 how we are doing for each of our segments. So I was dragging that order date to the filter shelf. And the key part of being able to make this type of chart that's not available in Show Me is adding that table calc, editing how it's computing, and then editing this axis. Okay, we are zooming along. So a question that I like to ask at this point is, what are we missing when we make a bump chart? So anytime we're making an advanced visualization chart and we choose a specific chart, we are going to, that decision means that we are not going with another chart. So we're going to be missing some information. We can't show all information. So I like to kind of pause here and give a second to the audience to think about what information might be missing if we're just looking at rank over time. I'll just give a minute or two here. If you want, you can drop in the Q&A or in the chat if you have an idea. And for those of you who came in the middle of this, we are going through advanced visualization types, and we have a Q&A, and somebody is helping, Steve is helping on the Q&A, so go ahead and make sure that you are using that Q&A to ask your questions throughout this, if there's anything you have a question on. Okay, so I just gave a couple of minutes to think about kind of what we may be missing, and I'm seeing a lot of great responses. And the answer is that I'm thinking there may be a couple of things that we're missing, but what I'm alluding to is actually the magnitude and the comparison in terms of magnitude of, how much more does our consumer segment have? It looks like each of these segments is actually equally spread across in terms of the amount of profit, because we're looking at them in just rank of profit as opposed to actual profit. So they seem pretty comparable here, but it may be that our consumer segment is just way, way more profitable than any of the other 2 segments, and we miss that information. So that's where I like to show a variation on the bump chart, which is going back to our small multiples that we built before. If you'll remember, when we built the small multiples, we actually had our subcategory on rows. So the subcategory on rows looked like this. So we had each of our subcategories, and then we had over time, and we had an axis here. I like to show this because sometimes a bar chart can give us more information than an advanced visualization type. So even though small multiples is a step up from show me, we don't often think about bar charts as advanced. But in this chart, using rank of sales, so that's using a table calc of rank of sales to put that on rows, allows us to actually see how our number one, what our number one subcategory is over time, and see the magnitude of that, right? So we can see phones and chairs. Even though phones is number one, we can compare and see that it's pretty close to that chairs subcategory in 2015. We can even add an action. So when I highlight, I see that the phones, I can see the rank over time. So that is a little bit of that bump chart experience where you see the placement over time. And I can choose that for each of my subcategories to see whether the rank has changed significantly over time. And I also have that magnitude here. So I love to share that just to go back to that first part of the talk, which is, yes, we can build a lot of complicated charts in Tableau, but it's always important to remember that why. Why are we building this? What information are we wanting people to see? So we're going to keep on moving in this presentation and keep on actually showing more complicated chart types. So this next chart type is called a control chart. And control charts are great for identifying outliers over time. We often use line charts like this and rely on our eye to call out an outlier. But it can be hard to tell whether we would want to include, what peaks and what values count as outliers. We're often just doing that by gut instinct and what jumps out, which is great for very, very distinct outliers. But this chart type actually leverages some statistical analysis to call out visually in a systematic way what an outlier is. And there are also lots of blogs on control charts if you're interested. I really recommend looking at how people use control charts. We're going to be using table calculations again and adding some reference lines. So this is an example of actually average minutes of delay per flight across time for different carriers. And without having a statistical help here and any colors to draw out, my eye is drawn to some outliers. So Virgin Airlines, for example, looks like there's a very high average minutes of delay per flight. But I am, again, relying on my instincts here. So the first part of a control chart is actually that we'll be dual accessing here. So we'll duplicate the measure, and we'll walk through this together. But you'll see that we'll have one line chart and one chart which is circles. The reason we want to do that is so we can color circles based on a calculation that we create. So first, we'll drag out a distribution band from the analytics pane, and that's one of my favorite parts of Tableau, is just being able to drag and drop some really complex analytics here. And you can choose what the range is to indicate an outlier. In this case, we'll choose kind of a standard deviation, one standard deviation from the mean to be specific. And then we'll add in a calculation to check if each of these points, average minutes, is one standard deviation away or below from the mean. We'll color based on that. once we overlay the two, we'll actually have the color be a part of that chart. So that is with the dual axis and then synchronizing the axes. So we'll build that together, but that was just an example of how that might be useful. Let's go ahead and get out of this presenting mode and build that together in a sheet. So we know we're going to be looking at something over time for this. So we'll look at sales over time. And let's say we know we want to, and we'll just make sure that this line is not, that reference line is not there. So let's say we want to be looking at this over time. We'll look at month again. And the automatic, if we just use automatic here, is going to be a line chart over time. So I'll rely on Tableau to give me that automatic mark type, because lines can be really helpful for looking at something over time. The next piece, though, is I want to make sure that I actually have the ability to color each of these points. So we have just one line, but I also want a chart where I have each of these different months as their own point. So I'll control-click this sales here. So now I have two sales on my rows shelf, and over on the marks card, you'll see that once I have two measures, I also have two marks panes. So I have my first sum of sales where I'm using automatic as helping me create a line chart, and then I have my second sum of sales helping me create what I want in this case is actually a circle, so a point for each of those months. So once I have that, we'll add in the actual check. That's not just checking a gut check, but it's creating a calculation to check whether these points are above or below. So we can use this analytics pane, and I'll drag on reference band. So we want reference band for that sum of sales. When I drag it on, you'll see that I have these options, whether to do a reference line, a band. We'll actually do distribution here. So I'm going to choose, for this case, for this control chart, I think it makes sense to do actually standard deviation. And I'll choose one standard deviation away from the mean. So I can change that here if I wanted to. But you'll see that my reference lines on the side have changed. So I have one above the mean and one below the mean. And I can change this tooltip here. We go ahead and say none, and change the label to be none. Maybe I'll keep the tooltip. So when someone hovers over it, they can see that it is standard deviation. And then there's some additional formatting that we can do, including filling above or below the line. But I like it just as a dotted line here. Yeah, we'll keep it a dotted line. So once we have that reference band, we don't have the ability to draw on some of our pre-attentive attributes like color, so some of the things that jump out to our brain very quickly. We just have this line. So let's add that color, right? So let's make a calculation that does that type of check. And we'll color each of these lines whether or not it is far enough away, whether we deem it an outlier or not. So I'll open up this calculation that I've created, and I'll just walk through it. So we've got an if-and statement here, if-or. So the first check that I want to do is basically if my sum of sales here is greater than the mean plus a standard deviation, so if it is above this first line, or if my sum of sales is below the mean minus the standard deviation down here, then flag that as an outlier. Otherwise, let's call that within range. Once I have that calculation, it's available to me. I'm able to drag that then onto color. So I'm going to drag it on to just my chart that has the circles, not on both, because I want to be just calling out specific points. So you'll see Tableau has updated, and we have that orange calling out the actual outliers here. And I want to remind everyone and just highlight that we can tailor that to what we deem an outlier, right? So right now I chose reference band to be standard deviation, and I chose one standard deviation away. We could adjust that reference band to be 2, less than 1, and we can adjust the calculation accordingly. That really is all up to you. The next piece here is how do we integrate these two charts? So how do we make sure that we're looking at these dots overlaid onto the line chart? That's going to be with the dual axis. Right now we have 2 charts because we have 2 sum of sales, but let's just go ahead and dual axis that. I'll right click on the second sum of sales and click dual axis. So automatically here, because we're looking at the same metric, we have sum of sales. The axes are already synchronized. In case you dual axis something and the axes are actually different, you can just right click on an axis and click synchronize axes to make sure that you are looking at the same scale, which will be pretty important to any analytical chart type, is that we're looking at similar scale here. And we can also do some extra formatting to make sure we're getting rid of clutter for the viewer so they can quickly see the outliers, and that'll be just getting rid of the second axis because we're looking at sales on both sides. So I'll click this show header, and now we have a cleaned up view of a control chart. All right. So we have one more chart that we're going to be building today in Show Me What's Not in Show Me, and that is going to be a Heatmap Calendar. So this Heatmap Calendar is something that I find really useful, and especially if we're looking to use date as a selector for the rest of our dashboard. Tableau is going to need date parts, and we'll work with those together. So I'll show you what I mean by that and some formatting. Again, lots of blogs in the community about Heatmap calendars. So this is an example of why a heat map might be helpful. So I actually am someone who bike commutes to work. So this is showing me kind of over time when the top incidents are for biking in Seattle, and I'm based in Seattle. And we can see a line chart, which is helpful, and I actually have different weekdays on the line. So each line is representing a different weekday. So this line here is representing Sunday. If we want to actually change that to a way that is helpful for me in planning out my week, I would really recommend a heat map. So you'll see here that instead of having a line chart, I have something that looks more like a calendar, and pretty quickly I can see that rush hour is a very high time for incidents. So that's why this type of chart, this advanced chart type, is appropriate for that type of analysis. Let's build this heat map together now. So we're going to go ahead and open up this new sheet and talk through what might be needed to build this here on your own. So the calendar view here, where we have days of the week and weeks down here, and we're just looking at a month at a time, is what we're going to be building. So the first thing that we know with the calendar is that we have our columns, and we have actually Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, so weekday on our columns. We'll go ahead and right-click, drag this order date, and we'll look at weekday here. You'll see now I see Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, etc. You can go ahead and fit width here. So we're using the whole visualization. And in addition to weekday, I also want to be looking at individual days, right? So I'm going to go ahead and pull over order date again on my rows, but this time, instead of day, I actually want to be looking at week number. So when we first do this, we get a lot of weeks. That's because we're looking at this for the full year, but a calendar is just for a specific month and a specific year. So that's when we'll add on a filter here. So I'm going to drag order date onto filter and choose a specific month year. So let's start with March 2015, for example. And now we get a view that is a little bit similar, more similar at least, to what we're used to in terms of a calendar. I can always expose this filter, so show filter on the right-hand side, so we can click through our calendar. But we normally don't look at more than a month at a time, so that filter makes sense for this type of a chart. What we're missing here is actually what day of the month are each of these. So we want to go ahead and add on both kind of a metric here, but then also that day information. So I'm going to drag on profit here to color. So we see that heat map will automatically fill for us. And I'm also interested in putting that day on my label and maybe even just profit on that label. So let's drag out profit to label and go back to that square view. Let's also drag on day onto label. So now we get that day. We can, with the marks card, adjust how that label is working. So instead of using that automatic alignment, I might do on the right side in the top. That's what I'm used to. I might also go into my text and edit. And so I'll bring over this text screen, edit so we have that day of order date on top. So it looks really a lot more similar to a calendar. So when I do that, you'll see we have what day it is, what the profit is. And one other thing that I would do here to make this really more advanced is hide this week number. That's not something that we normally see when we're looking at a calendar. So I'll click this show header to hide that. And now we have built a calendar view. So we can change this filter to be just a single value drop down. And now I'm able to choose a time period and see a calendar based on that month and how we're doing. So that is the last chart type that we're going to be building together. I want to make sure that we definitely go over kind of what we built today, but also how this might translate into your day-to-day. So, I went through and I'm used to building these charts. So when it's time for you to sit down and choose an advanced chart type, what might that look like? So again, we have this Tableau Viz cookbook. We have the ability to search for a chart by type of analysis. That's something that I definitely recommend, whether you use the Tableau Viz cookbook or you're just searching in the Tableau community. Try and narrow down what type of analysis you're doing first before you look for a viz. And that's kind of opposite of our normal flow. My normal flow for building used to be, let me think of this chart type that I've seen that I know looks really good and then apply my analysis to that. But I would recommend really focusing on the type of analysis, whether you're doing comparison or ranking, time analysis, or looking for outliers. That will be really helpful, I think, for giving guidance in how to choose a more advanced chart type out of Show Me. The next thing is that Tableau cookbook is on Tableau Public. We also have a lot of different community members who have built different versions of that. So this is something that I found that I think is really fascinating. It is actually looking at that type of chart, so the type of analysis that you're doing, whether it's contribution, comparison, ranking, and it gives you the ability to filter, but then it also adds in a level of difficulty. So you can tell before you're choosing a chart type, how difficult it might be. So that's available on Tableau Public. We also built out a lot of charts that there are many blogs to. Now this last sheet that I'll add here is actually a bar chart menu. So if we scroll down, you can see that we are just looking at bar charts, and the difference between them is really a formatting and a coloring. So sometimes the advanced outside of Show Me that you need to do is not choosing a different chart, but it is actually adjusting the chart to pop out and highlight what you want to be highlighting, right? So putting what you want on color, maybe changing the formatting. I'm someone who loves bar charts, so you may think they're boring, but I love in advanced visualization type to just come back to what we really want to be advanced. Is it the formatting and the look of the dashboard? Because there are many ways to get to that advanced level. And these are all available on Tableau Public. So if you just search for Viz Cookbook in the browser, and Tableau Public is a website that's like our YouTube of Tableau, you can search for Viz Cookbook. And if you see any of these Vizes and you want additional descriptions and additional blogs on them, I encourage you to click into them, but also search Tableau and Bubble Map or Tableau and Bullet Graph, and you'll see that there are a lot of different Zen masters and community members who have built out their own blogs for how to build these. So that's all that I have today. Thanks so much for joining. We'll stay on the line so you can add in any questions that you have in the Q&A. And Steve, I'll hand it back over to you, but we'll stay on the line, so don't hesitate to add in any questions that you have to the Q&A.
Great. Thanks so much, Maddie. That was awesome. I learned something. That was cool. So I think I've knocked out all of the questions. One of the answers to one of the questions is where can you find all this great content? I've included links to the Viz Cookbook on Tableau Public. I've included a link to our YouTube channel that show that the recording to this session will hopefully be up later today. For all the past months, you can find them there as well. And then I added on another great website, our Tableau reference guide, which is built by some of our Tableau Zen masters. That's just a how-to on some other amazing chart types. So please go off and have some fun, play around, and get out of bar chart and line chart jail with some amazing other types of visualizations that you can build within Tableau. Thanks so much, and we'll see you guys next month, second Tuesday of every month. We'll be back, and we look forward to seeing you. Thanks so much.